You wake up one morning and your back aches before you even sit up. You step outside for 10 minutes and your skin starts to burn. You look at your newborn child, this tiny fragile thing that took 9 months to build and nearly killed someone just to arrive, and you realize something no other animal on this planet ever has to think about. We shouldn't be this bad at being alive. Every living thing on Earth fits here. Penguins waddle across ice like they were sculpted for it. Camels cross deserts for days without water. Sharks have been perfecting the art of being sharks for 400 million years, and they still look exactly the same because they got it right the first time. And then there's us. We can't drink salt water. We can't see in the dark. We don't have claws, venom, speed, strength, or even decent fur. We're slow. We're weak. We're basically naked. And somehow we ended up running the entire planet. That's not normal. Most species take millions of years to develop one good survival trick. We went from banging rocks together to splitting atoms in less than 2 million years. We're either the most successful accident in the history of evolution, or we're something else entirely. What if the reason we feel out of place on Earth is because we are? Let's start with the obvious stuff. The things your body does that make no sense if you're supposed to be from here. You have 206 bones in your body. And somehow, one of the most important structures, the thing holding up your entire upper half, is also one of the most poorly designed pieces of anatomy in the animal kingdom. Your spine. It was built to be horizontal, a bridge between 4 limbs, weight distributed evenly across the length of it. That's how most mammals use it. That's what it was designed for. But at some point, our ancestors stood up. And instead of redesigning the spine from scratch, evolution just tilted the whole thing vertical and hoped for the best. It did not go well. 80% of people will experience serious back pain at some point in their lives, not because they lifted something wrong, not because they slept weird, but because the blueprint itself is flawed. The discs between your vertebrae compress under gravity. The curve in your lower back creates pressure points that weren't meant to exist. You're walking around in a body that's literally crushing itself under its own weight. Now compare that to a kangaroo. Also bipedal. Also upright. But kangaroos don't have chronic back pain. Their spines were built for standing. Ours were retrofitted. Badly. That's not adaptation. That's a workaround. And it gets worse. You go outside on a sunny day. You feel the warmth on your skin. It feels good for about 15 minutes. And then your skin starts to burn. Not because you did something wrong, just because you stood in the same sunlight that's been hitting this planet for 4.5 billion years. Every other animal handles it fine. Dogs lie in the sun for hours. Horses stand in open fields all day. Lizards bask on rocks in 100-degree heat and don't even blink. Their bodies were calibrated for this star. Ours weren't. We had to invent sunscreen. We had to create a chemical paste and rub it on ourselves just to survive the most basic environmental feature of the planet we supposedly evolved on. Think about that. You didn't evolve armor. You didn't evolve thicker skin. You didn't even evolve enough melanin across the whole species to handle it. You evolved just enough to survive in one region, and then you spread to everywhere else anyway, completely unprepared. Either evolution forgot to finish us, or we came from somewhere with a different sun. And then there's birth. This is the part that should bother you the most. Humans have the most dangerous childbirth process of any mammal on the planet. Not just difficult, dangerous. Before modern medicine, giving birth was one of the leading causes of death for women. Not injury, not disease, just the basic biological act of reproduction. A horse gives birth in less than an hour. The foal stands up and walks within minutes. A giraffe's baby drops 6 feet to the ground at birth and gets up almost immediately. Even elephants, with pregnancies that last nearly 2 years, give birth faster and safer than we do. Human babies are enormous relative to the birth canal. Their heads barely fit. The process takes hours, sometimes days. It's violent, it's traumatic, and it kills people. Regularly. No other species routinely dies trying to deliver healthy offspring. That's just us. Biologists have a name for this. They call it the obstetric dilemma. The theory is that our brains got too big, too fast, and our hips couldn't keep up because we also needed them narrow enough to walk upright. So evolution got stuck between making us smart and keeping us mobile, and the birth canal ended up as the compromise. But compromises aren't supposed to be fatal. Every other species that evolved larger brains did so gradually. Slowly. With time for the rest of the body to adjust. We didn't. Our brain size exploded in evolutionary terms. It tripled in less than 2 million years. That's not gradual. That's not normal. It's like someone flipped a switch. But the physical stuff, as strange as it is, isn't even the weirdest part. The weirdest part is what's happening inside your head. You are the only species on this planet that knows it's going to die, not just experiences death, knows it's coming, thinks about it, worries about it, builds entire civilizations around trying to make sense of it. Dogs don't lie awake at night thinking about mortality. Dolphins don't have existential crises. Elephants mourn their dead, yes, but they don't spend their whole lives obsessing over what happens after. They don't write books about it. They don't create religions. We do. Every human culture that has ever existed has developed some kind of belief system around death, reincarnation, heaven, the afterlife, ancestral spirits, eternal return. It doesn't matter where you go or how isolated the society, they all have one. Because we all have the same problem. We're aware we're temporary, and we can't handle it. Now, from an evolutionary standpoint, this makes no sense. Awareness of death doesn't help you survive. If anything, it makes survival harder. It creates anxiety. It creates fear. It paralyzes you when you should be acting. Most of human history has been spent not running from predators, but running from the thought of not existing. So why would evolution give us this? Why would natural selection build a brain that spends half its time terrified of something it can't avoid? Unless it didn't. Unless this awareness, this constant feeling that something is wrong, that we don't quite belong here, isn't a bug. Maybe it's a signal. In 1973, Francis Crick published a paper that should have changed everything. Crick wasn't some fringe theorist. He co-discovered the structure of DNA. He won a Nobel Prize. He's one of the most important scientists in history. And in that paper, co-written with chemist Leslie Orgel, he proposed something that still makes people uncomfortable. He called it directed panspermia, the idea that life on Earth didn't start here, that it was seeded intentionally by an advanced civilization from somewhere else in the galaxy. He wasn't joking. He laid out the math. He looked at how fast life appeared on Earth, how complex it was right from the start, and he said, this doesn't add up. Life showed up on Earth about 3.8 billion years ago. The planet itself formed around 4.5 billion years ago. That's only 700 million years difference. And for most of that time, Earth was a molten nightmare. It was being bombarded by asteroids. The surface was lava. The atmosphere was poison. And then, almost the second the planet cooled down enough to allow chemistry, life appeared. Not simple chemistry. Life. Self-replicating, organized, efficient life. Scientists have tried for decades to replicate the jump from organic molecules to living cells in a lab. It's never worked. Not once. Because the gap between chemistry and biology is massive, and somehow Earth did it in less than 1 billion years. Crick looked at that timeline and thought, that's too fast. He wasn't alone. In 1969, a meteorite fell in Murchison, Australia. When scientists examined it, They found over 90 amino acids inside. Amino acids, the building blocks of life, just floating through space on a rock. And some of those amino acids were identical to the ones in your body right now. Organic molecules aren't rare in the universe. They're everywhere. They form in the ice clouds between stars. They ride comets across solar systems. They survive impacts, radiation, freezing, burning. Life at the molecular level is already traveling. We know this because we've tested it. Tardigrades, those microscopic creatures that look like tiny armored bears, have been exposed to the vacuum of space, to radiation, to near absolute zero. And they survived. In 2019, a spacecraft carrying tardigrades crashed on the moon. Scientists think some of them are still up there, just sitting on the surface, alive, waiting. Life doesn't need to start on every planet. It just needs to get there. So let's say Crick was right. Let's say life didn't start here. Let's say it was sent. Then the question becomes, what about us? Because bacteria arriving on a meteor is one thing. That's panspermia. That's accepted science at this point, at least as a possibility. But humans? That's a different conversation. Dr. Ellis Silver, an ecologist, spent years compiling every piece of evidence suggesting humans are poorly suited for Earth. The back pain, the sunburn, the fatal childbirth. Even our circadian rhythm, which naturally runs slightly longer than 24 hours and has to be constantly corrected by exposure to sunlight. He published it all in a book called Humans Are Not From Earth. His conclusion wasn't that we're aliens in the Hollywood sense. He didn't suggest we arrived on ships. His hypothesis was more subtle and, honestly, harder to dismiss. He proposed that we might be the descendants of something that was brought here, deliberately or accidentally, perhaps as a colony, perhaps as an experiment, perhaps as refugees from a dying world. And then we forgot. Because here's the thing about memory. It doesn't last. Civilizations rise and fall. Languages disappear. Entire cultures get erased in a single generation. If humanity was planted here 200,000 years ago, there wouldn't be any GE left. No records, no story. Just this vague feeling, passed down through every generation, that something doesn't fit. Now let's be clear. Mainstream biology has answers for all of this. Good ones. Back pain? Evolutionary mismatch. We went bipedal only 6 million years ago. Evolution is slow. We're still adjusting. Sunburn? We lost our fur for thermoregulation, helped us hunt in the heat, but we spread to climates we weren't adapted for faster than evolution could keep up. Dangerous childbirth? Our brains grew faster than our hips could widen. It's brutal, but explainable. Even the environmental destruction makes sense. We evolved in small tribes where resources felt infinite. Our brains aren't wired for managing a planetary ecosystem. We're just an animal that got too powerful too fast. All of that is rational, evidence-based, peer-reviewed, but it still doesn't explain the speed. No species in the history of life on Earth has ever done what we did. Dolphins have been around for 50 million years. They're intelligent. They have language. They play. They teach. They mourn. And in all that time, they have never built a single tool. Chimpanzees figured out sticks 4 million years ago. They used them to fish termites out of mounds. It's clever. They've been doing it the exact same way ever since. No upgrades, no innovations, just the same stick. For 4 million years, we went from stone tools to smartphones in 2 million. We went from fire to nuclear fission in 12,000 years. We went from the Wright brothers to the moon in 66 years. That's not evolution. That's exponential. And nothing else in nature does exponential. Scientists have theories. Maybe it was language. Maybe it was cooking, which gave us more calories and let our brains grow. Maybe it was a mutation in the FOXP2 gene that unlocked complex speech. Maybe it was our ability to teach, to pass knowledge between generations. All of those probably helped. But none of them explain why it happened so fast. Because other species have some of those abilities too. Whales teach. Elephants teach. Crows solve problems and pass down solutions. And none of them did what we did. We didn't just adapt to Earth. We took it over. In less time than it takes most species to develop a new coating on their teeth. Something about us is different. And we still don't know what. Here's what we do know. We're the only species that looks at the stars and feels homesick. We're the only species that dreams of leaving the planet we're standing on. We're the only species that, the moment we developed the technology, immediately started trying to send messages into space. Not for resources, not for survival, just to see if anyone else is out there. Because somewhere, deep in the wiring of the human brain, is the suspicion that we're not alone. Or worse, that we're alone now. But we weren't always. Look, the most likely explanation is still the boring one. We're from here. We're a product of Earth, shaped by the same evolutionary forces as everything else. We just got lucky. A few mutations in the right place, a few environmental pressures at the right time, and we snowballed into intelligence faster than anyone expected. That's probably the truth. But probably isn't the same as certainly. And when one of the greatest scientists in history looks at the evidence and says, "I'm not sure this adds up," that's not a conspiracy theory. That's just honesty. Because the data is strange. The timeline is strange. We are strange. And maybe that's fine. Maybe we're just the weirdest thing this planet ever made. Or maybe, just maybe, we're exactly what we feel like. A species that doesn't quite fit. That burns in its own sunlight. That breaks under its own weight. That looks up at the night sky and feels something it can't name. Not curiosity. Longing. And if that's true, if we really are from somewhere else, then we've been trying to get home for 200,000 years. We just didn't know where to look.